Okay, I am so happy this morning to be with Superintendent Susan Infield with Highline Public Schools. Welcome, Susan, to our Equity Chats.
Thank you, Kim. So happy to be here.
I am so excited because I have just been hearing so much about the work that you've been leading at Highline Public Schools around racial equity and equity overall. I would love for you to introduce folks to Highline Public Schools, give them an overview of your student population, where you are, that kind of thing.
Sure. So I am starting my 9th year serving as the superintendent here in Highline Public Schools. And we are a richly diverse school system serving approximately 18,000 students pre-K through 12 in 33 schools. And when I say richly diverse, I mean it. Over 100 different languages are spoken across our schools. Close to 50% of our students come speaking a language other than English. And our top languages are Spanish, Vietnamese, and Somali. We are located just south of Seattle. Actually, when you fly again and you come to Seattle and land in SeaTac Airport, you are landing in Highline. Our district surrounds the airport and serves 5 different municipalities. And rather than a mission or vision, we have a Highline promise, and that promise is to know every student by name, strength, and need, so they graduate prepared for the future they choose. And the only other thing that I will add is we really try to use student first language when we talk about our children. And so, as I said, we try to avoid labels. So I won't tell you that we have 50% ELL students. I say that we have 50% students come speaking a language other than English. You know, we have roughly 70% of our students who come to us relying on us for breakfast and lunch. And approximately, 3,000 of our students require special services and support. And so we just think it's really important that we honor our students by using student first language, because we believe that every child and young person in Highline is brilliant, beautiful, and brimming with promise.
I love that. This has been such an unprecedented year, and you are really at the helm of that in Highline. Your student population is very diverse. And so as we think about what has happened this year and what has impacted particularly students of color, I'm curious about how you are looking at the racial impacts of this year and what you've learned as a leader about why school districts need to directly address racial equity and social justice.
Yeah, well, first of all, because our students expect and deserve us to. I think especially for me, leading such a diverse school system where I have many students who see themselves in the horrific events that are happening. And when I say see themselves, they know that could be them. And therefore, I have not just a professional responsibility, I have a moral responsibility to make sure that our students, our staff, our community knows that as a system, we are aware and that we want to hear from them and engage with them on how we affect change. And so for me, that's the big piece. And, we've been in this equity work for many years in Highline. I would argue that our Highline promise at a high level is a stake in the ground on equity. However, I think that, and you and I've had this conversation, you can talk about equity and not go deep on talking about issues of race. And so we have made it a point now to be addressing issues of race and racism more explicitly than we ever have. I think that's what this moment has really compelled us to do, and I'm grateful for that. I think the other thing is, you said that I've been leading, and one of the big things I've learned is, as a leader, you need to know when you need to step aside and let others lead. And so, especially as a white woman leading such a richly diverse school system with an increasingly diverse staff, because we've made a commitment to really, create a workforce that represents the rich diversity and beauty of our kids and our community. I have to know when it's not for me to be at the center of the work and the conversation, still engaged, still supporting, but not the one out front. And I think for leaders, that's a really delicate dance. And I would say that I don't always get it right. I think more than ever before, those of us leading work around race, equity, and identity have to be learners. we're going to mess up a lot. I know I do. And it's hard because those of us in leadership roles tend to have, well, I'll speak for myself, some perfectionism issues, some control issues, you know, sort of a need to always have the answer and make sure that, you know, things are going well. And, you know, that's just not possible in this environment. So I think that all of us are learning as we go, but for us in Highline, it's really a continuation of work we've been doing for some time. We're just getting much more honest about it. And as a result, it's getting messier. I'll be honest. I've said this before, this is not work for the faint of heart. There is no real roadmap for this. You just have to be willing to engage in the mess. And that's what we are doing in Highline because our kids deserve it. And frankly, I would say to my colleagues who are in systems that perhaps are not quite as diverse as Highline, the professional and moral responsibility to engage in these conversations is the same. Now, those conversations may not look the same, but we can't shy away. We can't pretend that all young people in our school systems need to not just be heard and be educated in better ways than we've done, but they also need to be a force of change for us as institutions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that. The truth in what you've shared about the difficulty of work. And I wonder how you, as a superintendent, where you have thousands of teachers every day who are in classrooms with students, and undoubtedly racial equity is, you know, part of the living and breathing of a school district as you think about how you're tackling these challenges. So how do you support teachers?
Yeah.
In this?
So good question. So a couple of things. The first thing that I will share is as part of, you know, our Highline Promise is at the heart of our strategic plan. And our strategic plan rests on sort of 4 foundational pillars. And one of those is equity. And we actually say, and I'm going to read it verbatim because I don't want to get it wrong, we will disrupt institutional biases and end inequitable practices so all students have an equal chance at success. We are deeply engaged in work around equity, race, and identity to better foster and support an environment in which our students, families, and staff grow and thrive. We strive to be an anti-racist organization focused on eliminating racism, institutional bias, and racial and other identity inequities. And then it goes on from there. So we actually this year held our 3rd annual Equity Symposium. Obviously this year we had to do it virtually, which was a bit of a challenge. But the focus this year, last year, the focus was really on implicit bias. And every staff member went through implicit bias training and sessions. This year, the focus was on becoming an anti-racist organization. So clearly many of us have been engaged in reading Kendi's book. And so the team of staff that put together this Equity Symposium compiled a list of sort of videos, readings, pretty extensive list that people could choose from in preparation for the symposium. And we began with a video that consisted of staff, community members, students talking about, you know, what we need to do to move towards being a more equitable anti-racist school system. And then we broke up into these groups, and you could identify which video or reading you wanted to be with. And so in most cases, you were with staff that you don't always see. So it made for really rich, interesting, and sometimes very uncomfortable conversations. But that Equity Symposium is really the jumping off point for the continued work of the year. And what I am very excited about starting this year is that as part of our equity policy, we have a procedure that calls for us to actually embed instruction on race and identity in all of our classrooms over the next 3 years. And so we have staff, we have a community advisory group, we have groups within the district that are leading this work. And it is developmentally appropriate. So for example, I'll just give you very high level, but obviously people can contact me and we can point them to the deeper work that's happening. But all of our staff and teachers are going to have training this year on instruction in race and identity. Every class this fall, there will be a focus on relationship building, right? Fundamentally, it comes down to how do you relate to other people, especially other people who don't look like you or share your background. And relationship building is something you can do at any grade level. But then, as is appropriate based on the content and the grade level, we'll move on to uncovering injustices. Then we will move on to identity and diversity. And then we will ultimately move on to taking action, right? What does that look like? So I think this is, to sort of your point, this is where the rubber meets the road. Policy is great, procedures are great, but until you embed it in practice in the classroom, nothing fundamentally changes for kids, nor do our systems fundamentally change. And so I think this is some of the most exciting and important work that's going to happen in Highline. I am not naive to the fact that there will be pushback. There will be resistance. And I think as district leaders, we need to be honest about the fact that, as I said, this work is not for the faint of heart. And we have to just be really clear on why we are doing this and be willing to be pushed and frankly, to stand strong. Right. And I'll just say, Kim, that's why, places like the league and the forums that you create for district leaders to come together and talk about these issues is so important, because this is hard and oftentimes lonely work. And to have other leaders, like-minded leaders, equity-focused leaders who are doing this work, really strengthens me and emboldens me and gives me someone to call on the hard days.
Yes. I love well, you and I have talked a lot, right? We know that the willingness is the first step. The commitment is the second step. I appreciate you underscoring relationships because that builds empathy. And that really is, when all is said and done, when you feel empathy for others, it's very difficult to be on the opposite side of the equation. So I appreciate hearing what you're kind of putting in place for your teachers this year. So one thing that's interesting is that people are at different parts of their equity journey. Right? We've talked about that as well. And I wonder about, teachers as leaders in this, right? And have you and thoughts about that piece?
Absolutely. So great anecdote that I think underscores the power of that. So earlier this summer, I got an email from a teacher and it was an incredibly thoughtful, insightful email where she basically, in a really honest, respectful, appropriate way, sort of called us out and said, a lot of the equity work that we talk about is really geared towards white people and helping them get a clue. And she said, we need to create spaces and meaningful conversations for, people of color to do the work as well, on their terms, right? That we're not gearing everything to school up our white colleagues. And she stepped up and became part of the planning team for the Equity Symposium, right? And really challenged us even on like the norms that we use. And are those the appropriate norms to use if we really want to be an equitable, anti-racist, inclusive organization? So I feel really lucky to be in a system where we have teachers who step up and say, and don't just sort of, stand by and poke at us, right? And like, you guys aren't doing this, but like step up and say, here's what I don't think our system is doing. I want to help change it. And I just have such respect and appreciation for that, because as I said, I can't lead this work alone, nor should I be the lead leader necessarily in every aspect of this work. So yes, we have phenomenal teachers who really push on us. And it's not always easy. It's not always fun. I'm going to be honest. I love it when people say, oh, well, I love pushback. No, you don't. Nobody loves pushback. Right? Let's just be honest. It's not fun. It's not fun, but it gets you to a better place. And so, it's been really good to have our staff. I mean, right now, actually, another example, we have teachers who are circulating a petition to really finally, once and for all, not just modify or make some changes to are what we call our challenge, our talented and gifted, highly capable, whatever you want to call it. But the self-contained model that we have, that is to say not representative of our student population. And those are the kinds of conversations we've got to have, right? And that's pushing us as a system to take action that we otherwise wouldn't. So yeah, there's a lot of, I think, really healthy activism and leadership among our teachers in Highline that makes me proud.
Yeah, absolutely. You also mentioned when you were talking about this notion of community advisory,
Mm-hmm.
and community is being part of the picture as you
Yeah.
think about equity, racial equity. So I'd love to hear more about this community advisory notion too.
Yeah. So, I think like genuine, real, authentic community engagement is something that as school systems we're constantly trying to do a better job of. It's just hard, especially engaging with communities, our various parts of our community that engage in different ways. So this is definitely a work in progress for us. But yes, around our instruction, race, and identity, we have put together a community advisory group that is, because we don't want to just sort of plop in a curriculum to presume that we know. We want to hear from people who are living this, right? And from the families of the children that we are educating and frankly also learning from. So that's one group. But we have I have a family action committee that I meet with quarterly to advise on policy. And we have some really powerful community-based organizations, like our Somali Parent Education Board, who are just a force, right? And they really, they're incredible partners, and they hold our feet to the fire.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that's okay,
Yep.
right? That's okay. I think where it's tough, Kim, is even when the will is there on the part of the system, and I would say the will is there on the part of myself and the system and our board. We have an incredible school board too that is 110% behind this work. In fact, our board has said we want to step up and lead the work around us being on an anti-racist journey as a school system. So I'm incredibly blessed in that regard. But where it gets difficult is we are bound by so many rules and regulations and timelines and processes that I can't help the community make sense of them all, because they don't always make sense to me and they are not of my making, right? And so sometimes, folks want us to do something in a district that we just can't do. Not that they're not naming the right thing and not that they're not asking for something that we should be doing. Sometimes it's just not possible given our constraints. Now, one thing I've been reflecting on is, at what point do we as leaders just say, well, forget it. We're just not, forget the constraints. Let's see what happens, right? Let's see what trouble we can get into, but we're just not going to do it. But, you have to take thoughtful risks, right? You don't want to be reckless. You want to take good risks, but you don't want to be reckless. And so that's where I know that sometimes there's a rub in engaging with our community groups, because they'd sometimes like to see different, better action, faster action than we can do.
That's great. I love that. As we wrap up here, I know that we've been talking about you and the partnership you have with women superintendents of color and your own female superintendents across the country. And I'm just want to kind of almost put a plug in for some of the conversations that you're going to be leading. And I would love to just wrap up by hearing kind of how you are engaging with other superintendents around this notion of racial equity.
Yeah.
If you can share just a couple minutes on that.
Sure. So Dr. Catrice Pereira, who is the superintendent in Gresham Barlow, reached out to several of her female colleagues back in the spring and said, we all need to come together and support one another. Like, this is getting hard. And so we call ourselves #SisterSoups. And we've pretty much been, Zooming together. I would say, it depends on the day. Sometimes we have family conflicts and things, but, on average, about 10 of us, all women, majority women of color, superintendents from across the country. So from, Oklahoma to Texas to Oregon, Washington. And we typically will get on and just sort of support one another. But lately we've been a little more structured, and we've actually been doing a book study on Wilkerson's Caste, which has been great, and the implications there. And we have really honest conversations around the work that needs to be done, not just for our kids, but for our systems, and frankly, for our leaders of color, and more specifically, our female leaders of color, who bear a burden in this work that others don't, myself included. And so, yeah, it's been really, really powerful to be a part of that. And frankly, thanks to the League, I have colleagues all over the country. You mentioned Marlon and others, and we really do support each other. Friday morning I was at my dad's, and Matt Miller just reached out to just see how I was doing. That kind of thing matters. It matters a lot. So yeah, I feel lucky to have colleagues like that.
Yes, and that's the relationship piece that just matters so much in this work. Well, I am so grateful to have this 15 minutes with you today, and just love to, to watch the work that's happening at Highline that you're leading, and appreciate just being able to also be a friend of yours as well. So looking forward to seeing how the school year goes as you kick off in the next week or so. But appreciate you being here today, Susan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate you as well.